February 12th, 1944, Camp Ruston, Louisiana. The winter sun hung low over the barbed wire, casting long shadows across the red clay. Inside the fence, a 15-year-old boy sat with a scrap of paper and a pencil stub. His hands moved with quiet certainty, sketching the face of the man who guarded him. The boy's name was Eric Muller. He wasn't supposed to be here. None of them were. They were prisoners of war, yes, but they were children. Boys who should have been in schoolrooms now sat behind fences in the Louisiana heat. And the man Eric sketched, Sergeant Robert Harrison of the 112th Infantry, wasn't supposed to see kindness in those pencil lines. But he did. And in that moment, both realized the war had stripped away everything except their shared humanity. Before we go further into this remarkable story, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from. Whether you're in Berlin or Boston, Tokyo or Texas, your support keeps these forgotten stories alive. Hit that notification bell so you never miss another untold chapter of history. Now, let's continue. Eric held up the finished sketch. Harrison stared at it through the wire. His throat tightened. The drawing showed him standing peaceful, human, not a guard, not a soldier, just a man with a pipe watching the sunset. Harrison took the paper carefully, as though it might crumble. That night he would fold it into an envelope and send it home to his mother in Ohio. She would frame it. She would show it to the neighbors, to the ladies at church, to anyone who worried her son had become something cold and hard in this war. The sketch would tell them what words could not, that even here, behind the wire, surrounded by enemy soldiers, Robert Harrison remained the gentle man they loved. But neither Eric nor Harrison understood yet what those drawings would become, how they would travel across America, carried in envelopes to mothers and wives, how they would prove that even in war humanity could survive the test of wire and guns and hate, how a child's pencil would say what 1,000 rifles could not. Camp Ruston opened in October 1942, sprawling across 500 acres of former farmland in northern Louisiana. It was designed to hold 4,000 prisoners. By 1944, it held nearly 6,000 German POWs captured across North Africa, Sicily, and the Italian mainland. They were the remnants of Rommel's Afrika Korps, young men who had believed in victory. Now they picked cotton and cleared timber under the Louisiana sun. The camp was divided into 4 compounds, each holding about 1,500 men. Wooden barracks stood in neat rows. Guard towers punctuated the perimeter every 100 yards. The wire was 12 feet high, topped with coils of concertina. Beyond it, pine forests stretched toward the horizon. It looked nothing like Germany. It felt nothing like home. But among the hardened veterans were boys. Not metaphorically, literally, boys. 14, 15, 16 years old. The Wehrmacht had scraped the bottom of the barrel by 1943, as the Eastern Front devoured men faster than Germany could replace them. Hitler Youth units were mobilized. Boys who should have been learning algebra were learning how to fire Panzerfausts. Boys who should have been playing football were manning anti-aircraft guns. When they were captured, the United States faced an uncomfortable truth. These were children. Enemy children, yes, but children nonetheless. The Geneva Convention had rules about prisoners of war. It said they should be treated humanely, given shelter, food, medical care. It said nothing specific about child soldiers. So the U.S. military housed them with the adults' same barracks, same wire, same gray uniforms, with PW stenciled on the back. Prisoner of war, a designation that felt grotesque when applied to a boy barely old enough to shave. Erich Muller had been captured outside Palermo in July 1943. He was 15 years and 3 months old. He'd lied about his age to join the Hitler Youth Combat Auxiliary, adding 2 years to seem eligible. His father was dead, killed at Stalingrad. His mother worked in a munitions factory in Dresden. Erich wanted to make her proud. Instead, he ended up on a transport ship to America, seasick and terrified, surrounded by men twice his age who looked at him with something like pity. He arrived at Camp Ruston in September 1943. The Louisiana heat was unbearable at first. The food was strange cornbread, grits, things he'd never tasted. The other prisoners called him Das Kind, the child. Some were protective. Others resented him, as though his youth were an accusation of their own failures. But Erich had something the others didn't. He could draw. Not just sketches, real art. His mother had noticed his talent early, paid for lessons when money was tighter than wire. By 12, Erich could capture a face with a dozen lines. By 15, he could render emotion in graphite and shadow. It was a gift, and in a prisoner of war camp it became his salvation. He drew to fill the hours. He drew to remember home. He drew because it was the only thing the war hadn't taken from him. At first he drew scenes from memory, the cobblestone streets of Dresden, his mother's face, his father, in uniform before Stalingrad. But gradually he began drawing what he saw around him. The barracks, the pine trees, the other prisoners playing cards or staring at nothing, and eventually the guards. The guards at Camp Ruston were mostly older men, unfit for frontline combat. Some had medical discharges. Others were simply too old for the infantry divisions being shipped to Europe. They rotated shifts, walked the wire, checked roll calls. The work was monotonous. The prisoners were generally cooperative. Escaping into rural Louisiana made no sense when you spoke no English and stood out like a swastika in a church. Sergeant Robert Harrison was 38 years old. A bum knee from a tractor accident kept him stateside. He'd been a school teacher before the war, high school history in a small town outside Cleveland. He had a wife, 2 daughters, and a mother who wrote him every week. Her letters were filled with worry. Was he eating enough? Was he safe? Did the prisoners give him trouble? Harrison walked the fence line every afternoon. It was February now, but Louisiana winter was mild compared to Ohio. The prisoners often sat outside when work details ended, soaking in what warmth the sun offered. Harrison noticed the boy early on, always sitting alone, always with paper. At first Harrison assumed he was writing letters. Then he saw the drawings. Erich drew everything, the barracks, the trees, the other prisoners. But mostly he drew faces. The old sergeant from Hamburg who told stories about the Great War. The young corporal from Munich who cried at night. The American guards who paced the wire with rifles slung over their shoulders. Erich drew them all with the same careful attention. He didn't caricature. He didn't mock. He captured. On February 12th, Erich sat by the fence sketching. The light was good slanting gold through the pines. He'd been watching Sergeant Harrison for 3 days, memorizing the lines of his face. Harrison had a kind face, Erich thought. Tired, yes, worn, but kind. Not the face of a monster. Not the face the propaganda posters had promised. Just a man doing a job he probably didn't want. Eric drew Harrison in profile. The sergeant stood at the corner of the compound, pipe in hand, smoke curling upward. His expression was distant, thoughtful. Eric captured the weight in his shoulders, the way his eyes seemed to look beyond the wire toward something far away. It took 40 minutes. When Eric finished, he studied the sketch. It was good. Maybe the best he'd done. Harrison turned and saw the boy watching him. Their eyes met. Eric didn't flinch. He held up the paper. Harrison walked closer, stopped a few feet from the fence. Eric pushed the sketch through the wire. Harrison took it carefully. He stared at the drawing for a long time. He looked peaceful in the sketch, human, not a guard, not a soldier. Just a man with a pipe watching the sunset. "You did this?" Harrison asked. His German was non-existent, but the question was clear in his tone. Eric nodded. Harrison looked at the boy, then back at the drawing. "Thank you," he said quietly. Eric didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. Something passed between them. Not friendship, exactly. Something quieter. Recognition. That night, Harrison sat in the guard's barracks with the sketch on his bunk. The other men glanced at it, made comments. Some laughed. "The kid made you look like a saint, Harrison." Others were quieter. "He's good. Real good." Harrison didn't respond. He was thinking about his mother, about the letters she sent, full of worry and love, about how much she'd like to know he was okay, really okay. He wrote her a letter that night. It was brief, awkward. Harrison wasn't good with words, not like his students used to be. But he tried. "Dear Ma, don't worry about me. I'm fine. The work is easy. The prisoners are no trouble. I'm enclosing something." One of them drew it a boy, just 15. "He drew me, and I thought you'd like to see I'm doing all right. Even the enemy can see I'm okay. Love, Robert." He folded the sketch carefully, slipped it into the envelope with the letter. The next morning he mailed it from the camp post office. He didn't tell Eric. Didn't think the boy would understand. But Harrison felt lighter somehow. The sketch wasn't just paper. It was proof. Proof that he was still human in a war that tried to strip humanity away. Word spread among the guards. The German kid could draw. Really draw. Within a week, 3 more guards approached Eric. They didn't speak German. Eric didn't speak English. But the request was universal. They pointed at themselves, then at Eric's paper. Eric understood. He nodded. Corporal James Dalton, 25, from Georgia. Eric drew him laughing, head tilted back. Dalton had a loud laugh that echoed across the compound. Eric captured it perfectly. Dalton sent the sketch to his wife. She wrote back saying she'd cried. She'd forgotten what his joy looked like. Private Earl Thompson, 42, from Kansas. Eric drew him smoking, eyes half closed, looking peaceful. Thompson had insomnia, nightmares from the Great War. The sketch made him look restful. He sent it to his mother. She framed it. Sergeant Howard Green, 36, from Texas. Eric drew him in uniform, standing tall. Green had been wounded at Guadalcanal, discharged with a limp and shrapnel scars. The sketch made him look whole. He sent it home to his son. The boy put it on his wall. Eric didn't charge anything, didn't ask for favors. He drew because it filled the hours, gave him purpose. But the guards gave him things anyway. Extra cigarettes, which he traded for better paper. A real pencil, not a stub. Once a guard brought him a small tin of charcoal sticks. Eric stared at it like gold. He could do shading now. real depth. The camp commander, Colonel William Bradford, heard about it eventually. He was skeptical at first. Fraternization was technically against policy, but the drawings weren't contraband. They weren't strategic. They were just human. Bradford decided to allow it. Maybe he thought it was good for morale for everyone. By April 1944, Eric had drawn more than 30 guards. Each sketch went home to a mother, a wife, a child. Each one carried the same quiet message. I'm okay. I'm still here. I'm still human. The war felt distant. In those moments, the wire still stood. The guns were still real, but the drawings created a space where enemy and captor could exist as something more than roles. Eric never asked what happened to his sketches. He didn't know some made people cry, or that others were framed and cherished. He only knew how to draw. Prisoners noticed. Some were proud. Others warned he was too close to the enemy. Eric understood their anger, but he also saw the guards were just tired men. A former officer named Klaus Fischer told him to keep drawing. It proved they were more than numbers. In May 1944, new prisoners arrived. Boys, barely teenagers. Eric drew them for themselves. Otto asked to be smiling. Friedrich asked to be strong, then cried. You are, Eric said. We're still here. The drawings became a quiet currency of hope. In a war built on dehumanization, they restored faces and names. Eric never thought it was important. He was just drawing. But to prisoners and even guards, he was doing something vital. That summer, the Louisiana heat was crushing. Prisoners worked for scrip. Eric, exempt from labor, drew constantly guards, prisoners, the camp itself. One sketch showed pine trees beyond the wire. He titled it, Heimat ist irgendwo jenseits. Home is somewhere beyond. A guard, Lieutenant Paul Henriks, studied it. Do you miss home? He asked. Every day, Eric replied. So do I, Henriks said. They stood in silence, separated by wire. By August, Eric had drawn over 70 people. The sketches traveled across America, hanging on walls and carried in pockets small defiance against war. By September, the tide turned. The prisoners grew quiet. Eric kept drawing. It was the only constant. One of the new prisoners, a boy named Dieter, 17, asked Eric why he drew the guards. They're the enemy, Dieter said bitterly. Eric shook his head. They're men, just like us. Dieter scoffed. They put us in cages. Eric looked at him steadily. And we'd have done the same to them. War makes everyone a prisoner, Dieter didn't argue. He walked away, angry but thoughtful. A week later he asked Eric to draw him. For my mother, he said quietly. Eric nodded. He drew Dieter, brave shoulders back, eyes clear. When he finished, Dieter stared at it for a long time. Do I really look like that? He asked. You do, Eric said. You just don't see it. Winter came again. Eric had been at Camp Ruston for over a year. The wire was as high as ever. The guards still patrolled. But something had shifted. The drawings had built invisible bridges. Not friendships, exactly, but recognition. The guards saw prisoners as more than numbers. The prisoners saw guards as more than oppressors. All were men caught in a war none fully controlled. Harrison approached Eric one cold December afternoon with a small package wrapped in brown paper. He passed it through the fence. Inside was a set of real artist's pencils and a sketch pad crisp and unused. Eric looked up, eyes wide. Harrison smiled. "Merry Christmas, kid," he said. Eric clutched the pencils like treasure. "Danke," he whispered. The war in Europe ended in May 1945. Germany had surrendered. Hitler was dead. The news reached Camp Rustin on a Tuesday afternoon. Some prisoners wept, some were silent. The boys seemed lost. Germany was rubble now. Families were scattered or dead. What did freedom mean when there was nothing to return to? Eric sat by the fence, sketch pad closed, staring at the wire, at the pines, at the sky. Harrison stood opposite him. "You'll go home soon," he said in broken German. Eric nodded. "Home?" he repeated. The word felt hollow. Repatriation came slowly. Ships, paperwork, medical checks. At Camp Rustin, Eric filled his last pages with faces Otto, Friedrich, Dieter, Klaus Fischer, drawn strong, human. In August 1945, he sailed from New Orleans with a duffel bag and a sketch pad. Harrison's pencils were worn to stubs. America faded behind him, but the faces stayed. He reached Bremen in September. Germany was ruins. Dresden barely existed. He found his mother in a refugee shelter then, exhausted, alive. They collapsed into each other, both having feared the worst. That night Eric showed her the sketches. Guards, prisoners, boys, men. "Who are they?" she asked. "People I met," he said. She paused on Harrison's face. "He looks kind." He was. Eric became an art teacher in Munich. He married, had children. He rarely spoke of the war, but the sketch pad remained. In 1968, a letter arrived from America. Margaret Harrison wrote that her father had died, leaving behind a drawing Eric made in 1944. He'd kept it always. It reminded him why he believed in humanity. She asked for another sketch. Eric drew Harrison as he remembered him, pipe in hand, watching the sunset, and sent it to Ohio. In 1987, a historian found the drawings. Eric agreed to speak on one condition: tell them it wasn't heroic. It was just human. Letters followed from families of the guards, grateful for proof their fathers had been seen. Eric Muller died in 2001. His sketch pad now rests in a museum, not as evidence of war, but of its opposite. Faces once divided by wire, briefly seeing each other as men. Sometimes the strongest weapon isn't a rifle. It's a pencil,